So, in case you don't know me yet, I'm Keurentjes, responsible for the marketing at TAGGRS, and today I'm speaking with Andreas, head of performance advertising at online marketing agency Klickimpuls, and he will be sharing his experience with TAGGRS today and how he will use it in practice. So, welcome, Andreas.
Hi, Arte. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, of course. Can you maybe give a short introduction about yourself? Tell us what you do, what Klickimpuls does, and where your focus lies.
Yes, of course. So my name is Andreas Hofer, and I'm the head of the SCA team here at Klickimpuls. We are online marketing agency based in Linz in Upper Austria. And we are specialized, or we are looking at online marketing more from a performance marketing perspective. We're also not really specialized in a certain type of client. We do have e-commerce clients and lead gen, B2B and B2C. And the ad spend of our clients range from a few €100 up to a few €100,000 per month.
Yeah, that's quite a wide range. And with how much people are you at the moment?
So Klickimpuls totally we are 13 people, and we have four core areas. So the SEA team, of course, focused on Google ads, but we also do Microsoft ads and Apple search ads. And we have a SEO department, and we do paid social. And what sets us apart a little bit of other agencies, we have a dedicated team for conversion rate optimization, and they also help us in tracking and web analytics.
Oh, yeah, that's quite important nowadays. And how did you first came into contact with TAGGRS and Google Tag Manager Server-side Tracking?
Yeah, it's a long story. We first got in touch with server-side tracking when the issue came up. I think it was some years ago. If I remember correctly, the main reason then was due to privacy regulations. And however, the setup and the maintenance of the server-side tracking via Google Cloud was not so easy. And another issue was the pricing. So it was very expensive also if you're a very small client with not that much traffic. And so it was only feasible for the biggest clients for us. Yeah. And back then it was not that real game changer also for me as a Google Ads manager. But then I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, I made an online course for Google Ads from Bob Meyer and Miles McNair. They're also Dutch, so I guess you know them. And they mentioned the issue with server-side tracking, and they mentioned TAGGRS, and I had a look at it, and I saw, okay, the pricing looks good also for small and medium-sized clients. And back then, also the issue with tracking prevention was problematic for us because we are seeing less and less conversions, and we wanted a solution that helps us here. And so we got in touch with you and started our cooperation.
Yeah, nice. So mainly because of Google Cloud was too expensive and it was hard to implement. And what was like the main reason to switch to server-side was for the data collection, on getting more data?
Yes. So for me as a Google Ads manager, it's always important to get as much conversions as possible, also for optimizing the campaigns and for reporting purposes. But it's also due to other areas from us. Paid social, they also had problems since iOS 14, and the server-side tracking really helps us here.
Yeah, nice. And which TAGGRS tools do you use most often?
So it's not really so that we are using, or that I'm using TAGGRS on a daily basis. It's more or less you set it up and check if everything works in the first days. And then we normally have weekly checks or monthly checks for our clients. And of course, tracking is an issue here. We're looking if everything is running smoothly. And then I normally take a look into TAGGRS dashboard to see the browser distribution, the consent rate. I think this is really helpful, but also the total numbers of requests, things like this.
Yeah. So you're saying you do weekly or monthly checks for your clients. How does that look like?
Yeah, it depends how big they are. We have some guidelines and best practices that we're going through. So also depends if it's an e-commerce client or lead gen. And yeah, we're checking the numbers, the campaigns, but also the tracking setup. And yeah, for example, we also try to get as much out of here. And yeah, for example, if the client doesn't have server-side tracking, we will try to upsell them, for example.
Yeah, yeah. So you've been working with TAGGRS for some time. How did that process went from the first conversation till where you're now?
So I think onboarding new clients is really easy, especially compared to the Google Cloud. And this was also one of the main reasons why we wanted to work with TAGGRS. I think this is also due to the very detailed documentation, which helps a lot. And I think what's also important is that you need the client only 2 times when they set up the DNS records and the payment. Because I think usually clients do not really want to be involved in this type of thing. They just want that everything works and that the numbers are good. I think the challenge is more to explain the client why you need this and the benefits of server-side tracking and why they should pay for a tool that does tracking for them or that optimizes the tracking. Because GA4 is free, Google Tag Manager is for free, and yeah, this is one of the main challenge.
Yeah, so yeah, there are nowadays a lot of analytics tools. Yeah, and clients need to pay for cookie banner nowadays, for tracking nowadays. There are also some other tools. Yeah, how do you convince the clients that a few years ago everything was free and now they have a lot of subscriptions? How are you handling that?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that they don't really understand why it matters to measure as accurate as possible. They sometimes say, okay, just measuring more does not bring me more conversions or more revenue. And I think they're also not really aware how tracking works on a technical basis and why it's difficult to measure conversions properly nowadays with tracking preventions and cookie banners. And then when we normally have two perspectives, a strategic and operational one. So from a strategic view, we argue that if you don't measure as exact as possible, you can easily overvalue or undervalue certain traffic channels, and especially in the paid sector or for campaigns in the mid or upper funnel. And then you would make business decisions based on these false assumptions, and maybe this can really harm the business overall, especially if you stop some channels or campaigns because you think, hey, it doesn't work, but you're just not measuring good enough.
Yeah.
And the other issue from a more operational view, especially nowadays with all the AI and automation in the ads accounts of Google and Meta, I think you really have to strive to give the algorithm as much data as possible to optimize your campaigns.
Yeah, yeah, and in the end, HCs like yours needs to prove their value, and yeah, there comes good tracking with it because then you can prove to your clients the impact on what you meant by creating those campaigns.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and were there also some challenges when setting up TAGGRS and the whole tracking, besides from convincing your client?
Well, I think it depends because we had some experience with server-side tracking before. It was not an issue to switch to TAGGRS because the setup in the Tag Manager server is more or less the same. It sometimes becomes a little bit challenging when you have a more complex setup with multiple domains, for example. But with your multi-domain tool, we were also able to manage this properly. From a business perspective, once we had an issue that we miscalculated the traffic of the client, which we wanted to onboard. And so it was on a higher pricing package than expected because the problem was that we just look at GA4 and summed up all the events and thought, okay, this package is okay, but in GA4 you're only seeing the consented events or the consented hits, and you can send also the events with the denied consent to the server. And so in the end, we had a lot more traffic than expected, and but the client understood this, and everything was okay then.
Yeah. And let's say a new client walks in and he wants to set up their tracking. So they now only have a client-side setup with the basic GA4, Facebook, and Google Ads. How do you onboard a client like that?
It depends if you have to migrate from an existing tag manager server, for example, Google Cloud to TAGGRS, then this is really easy. Also with your implementation guidelines, if you have to set it up from scratch, I think it's also not that issue, especially if you have the standard setup with GA4, Meta, and Google Ads. So of course you have to get the ads managers on board. For example, you have to create new conversion actions in the accounts. But normally, if the client setup is already very good and mature, it's really not a big issue. I think it takes about 3 to 4 hours, including client communication, to get it up, to get it set up.
Yeah, and then do you have some kind of checklist at Klickimpuls that you always use, or
Yes, we are really making it according to your guidelines. So I think the initial setup is really very easy. You can click through the onboarding process. Then you have the issue, of course, with the payment, but we're sending a mail to the client, and in the meantime we are setting up everything in the Tag Manager server, and then we are testing, of course, if everything works out. And what we normally do also in the Google Ads, in the Google Ads team, we are tracking the server conversions parallel to client. So we are seeing if the numbers make sense, and if they do, we are sooner or later switching to the server conversions only.
Yeah. And what is in your eyes a realistic percentage of what you can measure? So let's say you have 1,000 orders in the backend. What is realistic for you to get in, for example, GA4 when implementing server-side tracking and other tracking things?
Well, it really depends on your setup. If you're using content mode basic versus advanced, if you're using enhanced conversions, and of course how your cookie banner is designed. So from my experience, it's somewhere between 70 and 90%. But I think also one of the benefits of TAGGRS is that you're measuring or you're attributing the conversions to the right channel. So without server-side tracking, you're getting more and more conversions via direct because the click identifiers or the cookies are lost on the way. But I think if you reach 80 to 90%, that's already very, very good.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Like a few years ago, you have the concept mode, which was there. The Safari limitations. How did you? What changes did you make to adapt to those kinds of changes?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that you have to understand how tracking works really on the foundational basis. Because then you understand, okay, why are these things problematic for you? Why is it problematic if your cookie is deleted after 24 hours on Safari, for example, and what the limitations of client-side tracking are. So of course, Google has their own solutions with enhanced conversions. We are most of the time using this, except the client does not want to use it from a legal perspective. But we are normally combining it with server-side tracking, because I think you get the best of both worlds, the Google solutions and the external solution. And normally this really helps to get more conversion data or more accurate conversion data. And I think what's also cool with TAGGRS is the blog section or the knowledge that you're sharing with with everyone basically. Because then I also read about the enhanced tracking script and how this helps fighting against ad blockers, and you can squeeze out some additional percent from your tracking.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because our goal is to make the best tracking accessible to everyone, and a big part of that is creating as much documentation as possible, so everybody can set it up themselves. What type of clients do you usually onboard onto TAGGRS? Do you say, hey, we onboard every client that we get on TAGGRS, or do you say from 1,000 euros ad spend we onboard it, or how is that process at Klickimpuls?
Yeah, good question. Of course, it depends on the size of the advertiser. So as I said, we have some smaller clients with a few €100, and they have, let's say, 10 to 20 conversions per month. I think it really does not make that much sense to server-side tracking. We do not really have I would say if they spend up to or from 5,000 euros upwards. And it also depends if they are having only SEA, or we're also doing paid social for them. And then normally we propose TAGGRS to them. But we also have some clients that are not that big. So it's really also feasible for smaller companies, in my opinion.
Yeah. And are there also clients who only want server-side tracking because of maybe some GDPR regulations, or is it mainly because of the additional conversion data?
So it's really that in Austria, I don't know how it's in other companies. Of course, privacy is an issue, but not that big as it's in Germany, for example. And normally it's us who go to the client and say, hey, if you want to improve the performance, we would suggest that we do server-side tracking for you. So it's not really that the clients come to us and say, hey, I heard about this. Can you set it up? And it's the other way around. We're going to the client and then proposing it to them and say, hey, we're getting more data and your campaigns will benefit from this.
Yeah, and is it hard? Is it hard for you to convince the clients of server-side tracking?
Yes, as I mentioned, it's really not that easy. Because also to say, okay, you have the uplift of XY% due to server-side tracking. But normally we say, okay, hey, your competitors are also using it, or they're not using it, and you have an advantage over them. And if you're not using it, you cannot really make good business decisions, and the algorithms lack data, and this can harm your campaigns.
Yeah, so more convincing in terms of at the end the business results and getting ahead of your competitors.
Yes, I think so. And also, if we are doing paid social for them, I think the impact there is even bigger than for Google Ads.
Why is that? Why do you think it works better for paid social than Google Ads?
Yeah, as I said, normally for Google Ads, when we're using server-side tracking, we are tracking in parallel, so client-side and server-side, and normally we see uplifts about from 5 to 20% in terms of conversion volume, and this is really it's high, and especially if you have, let's say, tight ROAS goals for your e-commerce campaigns. This can really make a difference because you can bid more aggressively and get more volume. So for paid social, I asked my colleagues, they can't really say how much in percent the uplift is. But especially with the mobile traffic and iOS, from iOS 14 on, with the tracking preventions, it really is a big issue.
Yeah, true. And but you can check in Facebook with the Facebook comparing the Facebook pixel with the Facebook conversion API. You can also see some difference in that. So to check. And Yeah, can you maybe share a specific example for a client where server-side tracking helped improve maybe targeting or conversions?
Yes, one of the first clients that we onboarded, quite big player in e-commerce. We had already a very, I would say, good tracking setup in the client. So we were optimizing towards margins, not only revenue. And we really had very tight ROAS goals. As you say, if you're measuring margin and compared with the ad spend, you normally don't have that much room. And when we switched to server-side tracking, we soon saw that it's about 10%. We were measuring about 10% more conversions, and suddenly we had much more room for the campaigns to spend or to scale. And we were with this we were able to spend more, get more reach, and optimize the performance.
Yeah, so for really for scaling, the campaigns.
Yep, in this case, absolutely.
Yeah, and so one thing is scaling up the campaigns, and once you have those insights, how do you make sure your team actually uses them, or because it's getting more data is one thing, but actually doing making use of it is another.
Yes, you mean the SCA team, or?
Yeah, so on the one hand, you get when you get more conversion data, it's better for the campaigns and etc. But also maybe it can help with other business decisions. But then it's the important thing that you actually also use those decisions.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. I think it also helps when you make more strategic decisions, like let's say you're testing a campaign and then you evaluate performance, and you don't have to, let's say in the middle upper funnel, and you with client-side tagging, okay, you're missing other conversion data. And with server-side tracking, you get a more accurate picture, and you can say, okay, so the client, the campaign worked nice. We can, let's say, do it again, or expand the campaign. And so more in this type of direction.
Yeah, check. So in the last years, a lot of things happen. When it comes to data and performance, where do you see the role of performance agencies heading in the next few years?
Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of agencies, at least the ones in Austria that I know some colleagues from, they focus very much on what you can do inside the Google Ads account. And I think they underestimate the impact of external factors like tracking, but also landing pages. And so at least that's my impression. Also, when we audit other accounts, there hardly is any really advanced tracking setup. And especially with features like PMax or IMax, or I think in Meta you have the Advantage Plus, you can't really differentiate yourself with superior campaign structures and things like this alone. And you should really think about how you can get the best data into the ad accounts. And so I think one side you have this, you should optimize for conversion quantity, so that you, that's where the server-side tracking can help you, as we discussed. But I think the other issue is also the quality of conversion performance. So for e-commerce, like I mentioned, optimizing for revenue is not really the best practice. So you should optimize for margins if that's possible. And this is also that server-side tracking can help you. For example, you can store your margin data in a Firebase, Firestore database, and you can use this with a variable on the server-side tag manager. That's also something that not really much people know. And in the lead gen sector, for example, you should try to incorporate offline conversions to measure qualified leads and sales if that's possible, and not only the website leads, because especially very automated campaigns like PMAX, they tend to bring a lot of lead volume from my experience, but the quality is not always the best. So I think as an agency, you could and should get as creative as possible when it comes to tracking.
Yeah. And do you still think you're ahead when you're using server-side tracking now as an agency?
I think it's a very important part of the whole tracking setup. It also depends how you use it. I think there are also other issues where you can differentiate yourself. As I said, issue with conversion quality, which data you're feeding into the systems. Also the whole consent issue, if you're using consent mode basic or consent mode advanced, the way you design your consent button, I think this also plays an important role. But I think without server-side tracking, you won't be able to get to the top of the game.
Yeah. And let's say that's also the last question. Let's say you're a performance agency and you're still unsure on do I need to switch my clients to server-side tracking? What would you advise be to them?
So I think first of all, what helped me a lot is you have to try to understand really how tracking works. So if you click on an ad, you have this click identifiers. It's the same for Google as for Meta and other channels. And you have to understand, okay, how they are storing cookies if the user gives you consent, and what happens with these cookies. So that it's, for example, deleted after 24 hours on Safari. So not really very much people know this. So you should really try to understand the fundamentals here. And then I think you will quickly understand the downsides of traditional tracking, and that you need a more robust solution to stay really on top of the game. And I think that especially in Austria, that people or that agencies or freelancers want to outsource the tracking issue to the client or to the web agency that's building the website or the web shop, so they don't have to deal with it. I think that's a mistake. So you should really get the fundamentals first, and then look for tools that then can support you. I think that TAGGRS can be a tool. There are also other options with Google Cloud, and for example, and think that this can be a little bit overwhelming at first sight, and just would advise them to contact a local tracking expert or agency, or also TAGGRS directly. I think the support is also really, really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I guess that was it. Thank you so much for recording this testimonial with me, Andreas. And I really appreciate the collaboration with you and Klickimpuls, and that you're working with us.